This is Hebereke, also known as Ufouria, killed before its time by the very company who created it. When a new game console is announced, it's incredibly tempting for gamers to jump into the next generation right away. Brand new games with more advanced graphics, deeper gameplay experiences, and more expansive storytelling make it easy to get excited about technological advances in the gaming industry. But what about games that get left behind? The truth is that video games released at the end of a console's life are often some of the best, most polished games on the platform. But it's also true that a lot of these games often go unnoticed due to gamers and game companies looking towards what's coming next.
Hey there folks, John here for Kong's Quest, and today we're taking a look at a textbook example of one of these forgotten video games. This is the story of Hebereke, a Famicom game which would redefine a beloved video game developer, and would even go on to become one of the most sought-after video games of all time. It's a game that pushed boundaries in terms of storytelling, gameplay, and even sanity. And it would fall victim to a trap as old as the video game industry itself, doomed to obscurity by the very company whose brand it helped define. Now, fortunately, there's a happy ending to this story, but we've got a long way to go before we can get there, because as always, there's a lot to cover. So here we go. Released for the Famicom in 1991, Hebereke is a 2D platformer with colorful graphics, great character designs, and an incredible musical score rife with that classic Sunsoft sound made famous by other games like Blaster Master, Journey to Silius, and Gimmick. What sets Hebereke apart, however, is that it's one of the very few examples of a true Metroidvania on the platform, taking many cues from the original Metroid in terms of progression while improving on the formula in many ways. One of the most basic improvements, for example, was something that's taken for granted in most games today: a map. It's hard to imagine games like Super Metroid or Castlevania Symphony of the Night without their maps, but early exploration-based adventure games expected you to draw your own map if you wanted to keep track of your position. From dungeon crawlers to even the original Metroid, the lack of an in-game map was actually pretty common. And that's why one of the first upgrades that the player receives in Hebereke is a map. And you're going to need it too, because the game is huge for an NES title. In fact, Hebereke pushes the envelope in a lot of ways, not least of all in its storytelling. This is the story of a group of friends who fell down into a mysterious crater. One of the four, named Hebe in the Japanese original, wakes up in a strange world. Unfortunately, his companions have amnesia, so he has to fight them when he meets them, after which they'll join him and lend their special abilities to his cause. Like any good Metroidvania, this allows you to open up new areas and eventually defeat the big boss, finding a way out in the end. Upon localization from the Japanese version, these characters would all undergo a transformation, with differing names and appearances depending on which version that you choose to play. In the Japanese original, the main character, Hebe, is a little penguin-esque snowman character who can detach his head to attack enemies. In the European localization, Ufouria, he was renamed to Bop Louie, and his design was changed a bit to increase the size of his eyes and give him overalls to wear. But that's not all. The little cat girl, Ochan, would receive the most thorough redesign, becoming an orange dinosaur named Freon Leon who can freeze enemies with his breath. Likewise, Hebe's other two friends, Sukizumon and Jennifer, who is canonically not female, would receive name changes as well, to Shades and Gil, respectively. What's interesting to me is that while Ufouria is probably the more well-known version of the game, likely due to its rarity, Subsequent entries in the series would actually use the Japanese names and designs for the characters, rather than the localized European versions. This is even more interesting when you look at the imminent modern-day sequel, as it retains the Ufouria name, but utilizes the updated versions of the original Japanese designs. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Apart from the characters themselves, one of the most interesting things about Hebereke is its world. In fact, the Japanese term Hebereke translates roughly to drunkenness or untrustworthy, which is certainly the case when you look at the insane world that these characters inhabit. This is seriously one of the strongest game worlds that you'll find in the entire Famicom library. It's incredibly Japanese in its design and influences, and it's so much fun to see whatever ridiculous thing is around the next corner. The enemies you'll encounter are bizarre, and include crows that drop 16-ton weights on you, or just poop in the Japanese version, frog statues spawning little frogs, crazed clowns, disembodied mouths that crawl around on their tongues, and little guys with Mickey Mouse ears. Jumping on them turns them into colored balloons called harpoons that can be thrown at other enemies. These balloons are the only way to beat the bosses, identical big-headed humanoids whose appearances change accordingly to the area that they're in. Lastly, the music written by Naoki Kodaka, who also wrote the music for other Sunsoft classics like Blaster Master, Batman, and Journey to Silius, retains that immediately recognizable and unmistakable sound that can only come from a Sunsoft game. And I'm pleased to say that apart from a few design changes to some characters, the rest of the game made the trip west completely intact. And it fared moderately well in terms of reviews, both at home in Japan and also in PAL regions, while it received mostly favorable receptions from European publications like GamePro and Video Games and Computer Entertainment.
Ufouria is a mildly amusing foray into a world straight from Mario Land, but that just means it's a kick to play. The bouncy action's good fun, and you'll get plenty of it. In fact, you'll need a map to find your way. Special password crystals help you get through the hard times. If you're looking for an adventure, Euphoria's for you. Slasher Quan, GamePro.
But the game's success would be short-lived, because Sunsoft of America had some different ideas about what might be successful in their region. Just like Mr. Gimmick, a previous Sunsoft release, when it came time to localize Ufouria for American audiences, Sunsoft of America declined to entertain the idea.
The reason that Gimmick and Ufouria, among others, were not released is a problem that is as old as the game industry. Sunsoft of America management did not even support them, although I believe that both, especially Gimmick, could find an audience. The characters were deemed too strange or quirky compared to the Disney Warner Brothers world of cartoons.
But this is where we begin to run into trouble, because Hebereke, just like a lot of other incredible games, was released very late in the life cycle of the Famicom and NES. In a great many cases, games released at the end of a console's life are often overlooked simply because people are already looking towards the future. Many very excellent and in today's market very expensive NES games were released at the end of the console's life, well after the introduction of the Super Nintendo to the market. Games like Wacky Races, Power Blade 2, Panic Restaurant, and even one of the holy grails of NES collecting, Little Samson. Hebereke also fell into this category, and like those other games, it's very expensive to buy today as a result. Unlike those games, however, Hebereke, for a time anyway, would see further entries in the franchise on the NES, Super Famicom, PlayStation, Sega Saturn, arcade, and even the Wonder Swan, though most would be puzzle games and none would be platformers like the original. Notable non-puzzle entries in the series include Sugoi Hebereke, a free-for-all fighting game, and Hashira Hebereke, a foot racing game that was a bit like Mario Kart, but presented from an isometric viewpoint, and both are absolutely worth checking out. There's even an unreleased arcade puzzle game which used pre-rendered graphics for characters called Hebereke's Pair Wars, but unfortunately, the only known prototype was supposedly lost in a flood. Apart from this though, most of the games are available via emulation if you want to track them down, and it's absolutely worth the effort if you want to experience all that this wild, unforgettable series has to offer. But getting back on track, Hebereke's final entries would be a set of Picross-style games starring one of Hebe's friends, Ochan, with the final entry being released on January 11, 2001. Hebe and his friends would also pop up in several places over the years, from a cameo in Lemmings on the Sega Genesis to most recently appearing as playable characters in Penguin Wars for the Switch. The crew even starred in a manga series that began in 1991 and ran in various forms until 1998. At one point, Sunsoft even considered Hebe and his friends to be their mascots. The characters were that recognizable, especially at home in Japan. But all good things must come to an end. And after the last entry in the series in 2001, everything just stopped. There was no big announcement, no fanfare. A series that was used to rebrand one of the greatest developers of the 8 and 16-bit eras just stopped. And the wild, wacky, incredibly unique world of Ufouria faded completely into obscurity, only to be remembered by the most die-hard of Sunsoft fans, never to be seen again. Which is why you can imagine the absolute shock when this trailer dropped in January of 2024. Personally, I lost it when Nintendo of America casually dropped this trailer on their YouTube channel. I thought this was a series that we would never in a million years ever see again. Remember, the original Hebereke was a late release on its home console that, despite being released on the Wii Virtual Console in August of 2010, was largely locked away from Western audiences, either due to lack of regional availability or scarcity of physical units. The potential number of people who are actually familiar with the IP when compared to something like Castlevania or Mega Man has got to be infinitesimally small. And yet, here we are, Ufouria, an obscure Japanese title rejected and left for dead by the American arm of the company that created it, is seeing new life in a worldwide release, 23 years after the last game in the series. By all accounts, this franchise should be dead and buried, but here, at the end of another wildly successful Nintendo console's life, history is repeating itself. Ufouria 2 has arrived, and I couldn't be happier. Only time will tell if this lovable cast of characters and this wacky world will stick in gamers' collective consciousness a second time around, but I, for one, am incredibly glad to see them try. The game is available on the PS5, Xbox, and Switch's digital storefronts, and you can also pre-order the physical version at major retailers if you don't mind waiting until July for delivery. If you'd rather play the original first, you can easily find both the PAL and Japanese ROMs online, and there's even a translation patch on romhacking.net if you decide to go with the Japanese version. But in the end, there's really no wrong way to experience the world of Ufouria, and it's been an absolute pleasure sharing the story of this unique series with all of you. We'll be back again, but until next time, like, comment, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.